All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're looking at building a modern SOC in Azure. And specifically, we're looking at notes from Nestor Revron's SC200 Security Analyst Operator Training. Day 2 specifically, where he really gets into the details of building out this modern SOC.
Yeah, one thing that really stood out to me in looking at these notes is that it's not just, step by step, click this button, then click that button. It's really understanding why you are making these configurations. And I think that's important for building a modern SOC because you need to be able to adapt to threats, not just checking boxes.
Totally, and it's like having this expert in your ear as you're building out this environment. And there's a lot to cover. I mean, we're talking Azure Arc, Defender for Cloud, Log Analytics Workspaces. It's a ton of information. So our mission today to really go through all of these notes and pull out those golden nuggets for you, the things that you need to know, even if you aren't, necessarily working in Azure every day.
Right, because the concepts that he's talking about here, they apply to security in any environment, not just Azure.
Okay, so let's dive into it. We're on day 2 of the SC200 training. And Nestor is setting the stage for this modern SOC in Azure. And one of the things that jumps out right away is Azure Arc. I've heard this name before, but the way that he explained it really clicks for me. Can you help break this down for us? What is Azure Arc and why is it so important?
Yeah, so Azure Arc is like this bridge. It allows you to extend Azure management and governance to any machine, really. It doesn't matter if it's Windows or Linux, or even if it's a server in your office. You can bring it all under that Azure umbrella with Arc.
So like I could have a Linux server running in a data center, and I could manage that as if it was sitting right on my Azure cloud.
Exactly. And he actually walks through that. In his training, he has lab machines that are physically outside of Azure. And he goes and he sets up Arc on those machines. And then boom, you're managing updates and you can apply security policies just as seamlessly as you would if it was a native Azure resource.
That's huge for companies that maybe have these hybrid environments.
Okay.
Or maybe they're hesitant to go all in on the cloud. They can start with Arc and start to dip their toes in.
Yeah, it's all about flexibility and choice. You can pick and choose what you want to manage with Azure, even if it's not actually located there in the cloud. And this leads us perfectly into another important piece here, Defender for Cloud.
Okay, Defender for Cloud. I'm already sensing this is going to be a big one.
It is, and it's also where things get fascinating because Defender for Cloud is really your central security hub in Azure. But the twist is that it's not just limited to protecting your Azure resources.
Wait, so it can do more than just protect my virtual machines and my databases in Azure?
Right. It goes way beyond that.
Thank you.
It can also look at your on-prem machines, things that you have running in other clouds like AWS or GCP. It can even look at containers and even your code repositories.
Well, hold on. So it can look at code for vulnerabilities before it's even deployed. That seems like it's next level.
It is, and that's really a key theme. You're not just reacting to threats, you're proactively building security to every part of your IT environment. And Defender for Cloud helps you do that.
Okay, I'm starting to see the big picture here, but let's back up a little bit because you mentioned that Defender for Cloud is now subscription-based.
Right.
No more messing around with licenses.
Right, that's a big shift, and I think it reflects how we approach security today. You're always getting the latest updates, the latest features, and, overall, it's just a more streamlined experience.
But it's more than just convenience, though, right? There's a strategic reason for this change.
Absolutely. It ensures that organizations are really empowered to leverage and activate Defender for Cloud to its full potential. I mean, it's proactively scanning your environment. It's flagging anything that looks risky, any misconfigurations you might have missed, and then it gives you recommendations for how to improve.
So it's like having this 24/7 security consultant who's always monitoring things and giving you advice. I can see why that subscription makes sense. But with all this scanning and monitoring going on, there must be a lot of data being generated. Where does it all go? How do we make sense of it?
Well, that's where Log Analytics Workspace comes in. That's where all of that data is going to flow into, is where it's organized.
Now, Nestor really went deep on Log Analytics Workspaces. He was talking about tables and retention and pricing, even something called a daily cap. It was a lot of information. Can you help break it down?
Yeah, for sure. So Log Analytics Workspace, it's all about ingesting and organizing massive amounts of data from your environment. And those tables that he was talking about, that's how the data is structured within the workspace. So you can easily query and analyze it.
So it's like a giant, well-organized database.
Yeah.
For all of our logs and events.
That's a great way to put it. But managing all that data can be tricky, right? Especially when we think about cost and long-term storage. So that's where retention policies come in.
Right, because you don't want to be storing things forever. That can get really expensive.
Yeah.
And you probably don't need everything forever.
Right, and retention policies give you control over how long you keep specific types of data, and that way you can balance cost with compliance.
Now, what about that daily cap? Is that another way to control costs?
Yeah, you can set a limit on how much data flows into your workspace each day, so you're not accidentally spending a ton of money.
That's clever. But how do you actually get insights from all this data? Nobody wants to sit there and sift through raw logs all day.
Nobody, and that's where workbooks come in. It's essentially a way to visualize that data. You can see trends, identify anomalies, you can create custom reports, dashboards, whatever you need to make that data work for you.
I like that, making data work for you, not the other way around.
Exactly. It really is. And it's like having this view of your security world. You can see the threats before they even happen. But there's another change happening in Log Analytics Workspace. Nestor was talking about the switch from the old Log Analytics agent to the new Azure Monitor agent. AMA.
Right, AMA, he seemed pretty excited about it. Is it just a shiny new tool, or is there more to it?
Oh, it's definitely more than that. AMA is a big step forward for Azure monitoring. It's more efficient, it's more powerful, and it gives you so much more control over data collection.
So it's a win-win. Sounds like the old agent is going away.
Yeah, they're phasing it out. Microsoft wants everyone to move over to AMA. But there is a little thing. While AMA is great for Azure resources, Azure Arc uses its own separate agent to manage those on-prem machines.
Oh, interesting. So I might be using different agents depending on what I'm managing. Good to know. One thing that really stood out to me, though, was all this talk about data collection rules. Nestor really emphasized that they're key for getting the most out of Log Analytics Workspace. Why are those so important?
So data collection rules let you control exactly what data gets sent to your Log Analytics Workspace. You can decide which logs to collect, how often to collect them. You can even filter the data.
I can see why that's important. You don't want to drown in irrelevant data. Plus, it helps keep costs down.
Exactly. It's all about being smart with your data. Make sure you have the right information to make good decisions.
Now, earlier you mentioned Defender for Cloud can connect to other cloud environments like AWS and GCP. And Nestor talked about this too, but he was also very clear that Defender for Cloud can't protect everything in those environments the same way that it can for Azure resources. Can you unpack that a little? That seems like an important point.
Yeah, it's easy to get excited about having that one view across your clouds and thinking that Defender for Cloud provides that same protection everywhere. But it's not quite that simple. While it can see what's going on in those other environments, assess the security posture and make recommendations. Its ability to actually protect those resources is limited.
Okay, so more about visibility and guidance than hands-on protection. Can you give me an example?
Sure, let's say you have an Amazon EC2 instance running in AWS. Defender for Cloud can connect to it, scan it for vulnerabilities, even check if it's compliant with security benchmarks, but it can't actually enforce things, like real-time threat protection, or manage network security rules on that instance, the same way it can for an Azure virtual machine.
So it's kind of like having a security consultant who can give advice, but you're still responsible for taking action in those other environments.
That's a great analogy, and it really highlights the shared responsibility model in the cloud. The cloud providers are responsible for securing the infrastructure, but you're responsible for securing what you put in it.
Makes sense. Now, Nestor also talked about connecting Defender for Cloud to things like GitHub and Docker Hub, which seems a little strange at first, but I'm guessing there's a reason for that.
There is. It goes back to that idea of shifting left in security. By connecting to code repos and container registries, Defender for Cloud can spot security risks way earlier, before you even deploy anything.
So you can catch those issues before they become problems in production.
Exactly. Early detection can save you so much time and money.
Can you walk me through how that works? Like with GitHub, for example.
Sure. So let's say your developers are pushing code to a GitHub repo. You connect your GitHub account to Defender for Cloud, and it can scan that code for all sorts of things.
What kind of things?
Oh, things like vulnerabilities in third-party libraries that your code is using, or maybe secrets like API keys that were accidentally committed to the code, or even just insecure configurations.
So it's like having an automated code review running all the time.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't just find the problems, it tells your developers how to fix them.
Now that's what I call empowering developers. It's not about blame, it's about helping them write more secure code.
Absolutely. And that kind of collaboration is so important in development today.
As we're talking about all this, it seems like Defender for Cloud is becoming more than just a security tool. It's a platform for building security into everything you do.
I completely agree. That's a big takeaway from Nestor's training. Security isn't just a separate function anymore. It needs to be part of everything.
Well said. Now let's talk about something that's always on everyone's mind. Cost. Nestor admitted that Defender for Cloud can get pricey, especially if you're not careful. He talked about optimizing costs in Log Analytics Workspace. But did he share any other cost-saving tips for Defender for Cloud?
Yeah, he did. Cost optimization is a big deal in cloud security, and one of his biggest recommendations was to be smart about which Defender plans you activate. Don't just turn everything on, figure out what your most important assets are, and then prioritize the plans that give you the most value.
It's like grocery shopping. You don't just throw everything in your cart.
Exactly. You need to understand how the pricing works for Defender for Cloud, and Microsoft has great documentation on that.
Sounds like it pays to do your homework.
It does. And here's a tip from Nestor. Try the free trials. That way you can test out the features, see how they work, before you commit to a paid subscription.
That's a great tip. It's impressive how Nestor can balance all these technical details.
With practical, real-world advice.
It makes it all so much more accessible. Okay, let's get a bit more specific here. Nestor kept mentioning these Defender plans. What are those exactly? Are they like special security packages for different workloads?
They are. Defender plans give you more specific protection for certain parts of your environment. Two of the big ones he talked about were Cloud Workload Protection, or CWP, and Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM.
So many acronyms. Let's break those down. What's so special about CWP?
CWP is all about protecting your workloads, no matter where they're running. It could be virtual machines, containers, even databases. CWP has a bunch of features to keep them safe.
So threat detection, vulnerability assessments, things like that.
Exactly, but it also includes things like runtime protection, which is like a bodyguard for your applications. It protects them from attacks in real time.
So it's not just about finding vulnerabilities, it's about stopping them from being exploited.
Yeah.
What about CSPM then? Is that more about compliance and best practices?
You got it. CSPM is all about making sure your security posture is strong and that you're following industry standards.
So it's like a built-in security audit team.
Pretty much. It can help you spot misconfigurations, see how you stack up against benchmarks, and recommend ways to improve.
This is all great information. But I have to ask, why should someone who's not using Azure care about this? Is this all just for Microsoft people?
That's a great question. And it brings up a key point from Nestor's training. Even though he's talking about Azure, these concepts apply to any cloud environment.
So whether I'm on AWS or GCP, the principles are the same.
Absolutely. Security is a challenge everywhere. Things like central logging, vulnerability management, security posture management, those are all important no matter where your data is.
I like how you're bringing it back to the bigger picture. It's not about learning one specific tool. It's about learning how to think about security.
Exactly. That's what Nestor teaches you. He gives you the knowledge and skills to be secure in any cloud.
That's a great point. It's a journey. And speaking of journeys, Nestor also talked a lot about compliance.
Yes, compliance. The thing that everyone loves to hate.
Right.
But Nestor really has an interesting take on it. He doesn't just see it as checking boxes. He really emphasizes that understanding these security standards and regulations, it's not just a good idea, it's critical for any company that wants to, be successful today.
And it's not just about avoiding fines either, right? There's a real business benefit to having a strong security posture. It builds trust with your customers. It protects your reputation. It can even give you a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. And that's where Defender for Cloud comes in again. Lester talked about how it can make compliance so much easier. It has built-in tools and assessments that can help you meet these regulatory requirements.
So can you give me an example of that? Like, let's say my company needs to comply with PCI DSS.
Right, the payment card industry data security standard.
Yeah, exactly. How can Defender for Cloud help with that?
So let's say you're using Azure to process credit card information. Defender for Cloud has assessments that can check your environment to see if you're meeting those PCI DSS requirements. It'll point out any gaps or misconfigurations. And it gives you specific steps to fix those issues.
So it's like having a compliance expert built right into the platform.
That's one way to think about it. But it's important to remember, it's not just about checking boxes. You need to understand why these requirements exist and how they make your environment more secure.
It's about connecting compliance to your overall security strategy, not treating it as a separate thing. Now, speaking of security strategy, Nestor mentioned something called the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark. What is that?
So the Microsoft Cloud Security Benchmark, it's basically a set of best practices for securing Azure. It's based on industry standards, and it gives you a clear roadmap for assessing and improving your security.
So it's like a blueprint for a secure Azure environment.
Exactly. It covers all sorts of things: network security, identity management, data protection, incident response. And the cool thing is Defender for Cloud can automatically check to see if you're meeting those benchmark requirements.
And I'm guessing it tells you where you need to improve.
It does, and it gives you recommendations on how to do that.
Okay, so we have this benchmark that sets the standard. We have Defender for Cloud that enforces it. But what happens when Defender for Cloud finds a problem?
That's where security alerts come in. When Defender for Cloud spots a risk, it sends you an alert.
Like a smoke alarm going off.
Exactly. But it's more than just an alarm. It tells you what the problem is, how serious it is, which resources are affected, and it gives you steps to fix it.
So it gives security teams the information they need to respond quickly.
That's the goal.
Now, two other terms Nestor mentioned were inventory and recommendations. How do those fit in with Defender for Cloud?
So inventory is all about knowing what you're protecting. Defender for Cloud automatically keeps track of your Azure resources, so you have a central inventory of everything.
Like an up-to-date map of your environment.
Exactly.
And recommendations, those are the suggestions that Defender for Cloud makes, right? Are those just for security, or do they cover other things too?
Recommendations are actually one of the best parts of Defender for Cloud. They can be for security, cost optimization, performance improvement, all kinds of things.
It's like having a team of experts looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, they're constantly analyzing things and making suggestions.
But as Nestor pointed out, you shouldn't just blindly follow every recommendation. You need to understand the why behind them and decide which ones are right for you.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into building a modern SOC in Azure. We talked about extending management with Azure Arc, we dove deep into Defender for Cloud, and we explored all sorts of compliance and security best practices.
Nestor's training has been so valuable. He showed us the power of these tools, but he also emphasized the importance of continuous learning, which is critical in security.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Wow.
How would you apply these concepts to your own environment, no matter what cloud you're on? AWS, GCP, even a hybrid environment. Those core security principles are the same. Take what we've learned from Nestor and use it to build a more secure cloud.
And never stop learning.
That's a great place to end it. Thanks again to Nestor Revron for sharing his expertise, and thank you all for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay secure.